Could the rollout of 5G cellular antennas in your neighborhood make your entire family sick? You're listening to the 2025 EMF Hazard Summit. My name is Nick, the EMF Guy Pinot, and this is the EMF Hazard Summit, Protect Your Children. In this interview, journalist Mona Nilsson from Sweden shares the many scientifically published case studies she has co-authored with scientist Professor Leonard Hardell, and these case studies show how quickly 5G towers can make people sick. We also address the incredible level of industry influence that we see over our regulatory agencies all around the world, and how journalists like Mona are facing censorship on the topic of 5G. Mona Nilsson is a former freelance journalist, author of 2 books on the health risks of EMFs and the industry's influence on various agencies. Both books are published in Swedish language with a focus on wireless technology. Mona is also the founder and director of the Swedish Radiation Protection Foundation. And during the last years, she has collaborated with Dr. Leonard Hardell, a world-renowned oncologist and epidemiologist from Sweden, and has published the first studies in the world this far on the health effects on people living too close to 5G base stations. I'm here today with journalist Mona Nilsson. How are you, Mona?
Thank you. I'm fine.
Can you give us a little bit of background about how, as a journalist, you started publishing on the health dangers of human-made electromagnetic fields?
Well, it was in connection with the 3G rollout. I was interested in looking into what is 5G, because at that time, in 2002 and 2003, I didn't know anything about mobile phone radiation and health risk and health issues. So I was quite surprised, not to say shocked, when I started to look into this issue to find that what the government, the industry, and the governmental agencies told us was not true. They told us that 3G and other wireless technologies was safe. No research had found that there would be any health risks. But the fact was that already by then we had quite a lot of scientific studies that indicated health risks with this technology. And also with 3G, as with 5G now, they started to roll out 3G without any health impact studies on humans. So 3G was, as 5G is now, an experiment with human health.
And at the time, were you working as a journalist? Were you able to publish or to talk about these issues, or what was the reception to this reporting?
Well, at that time, the first years I worked with this issue, the interest in the mainstream media was quite large, and I was able to talk about my findings in the major Swedish media outlets, for instance, the Swedish radio and the Swedish television, public television. And also I published a lot of articles in an environmental magazine, and I finished by writing 2 books that was published in 2005 and 2010. And then I started the organization that I work with now, the Swedish Radiation Protection Foundation, in 2012. We work with presenting research on this issue. We publish articles. We investigate the governmental agencies, the conflicts of interest with the telecommunications industry. And during the last years, I have started to collaborate on scientific studies with the Swedish oncologists and epidemiologists, Dr. Leonard Hardell. And we have, among others, published the first 8 studies on health effects on 5G. And these are case studies.
So what is meant by case studies? Can we go right into this? What have you studied exactly, and what did you find?
Well, what a case study is, a presentation of a person or some persons, and presenting the case, what happened to them, and in this case with the 5G, it includes a description of their health before, during, and after 5G exposure. And these are case studies we have published in international scientific magazines. They comprise in total 17 people. And we have made a summary that was published in June on 16 of those included persons based on 7 case studies. So then we made a summary of the 7 various case studies. And I can, for instance, tell you about the first case studies. We describe a couple who got a 5G base stations on the roof right above their apartment, where they had lived for approximately 10 years without no health issues whatsoever. The 5G base station was installed. They got immediately sick, and they were previously healthy. And they got sick within a couple of days with typical symptoms that has for 50 years been described as an effect from microwave exposure. And we call it, and it has been called previously, the microwave syndrome, or radio frequency illness. It has several names, but we preferred to call it the microwave syndrome. And we measured extremely high levels of radiation in their apartment, in their bedroom. It reached the maximum level of our meter, which is 2.5 million microwatts per square meter. And that is extremely high. That's levels that we never measured before from 3G or even 4G. And this level made those persons very sick within 2 days. They had to leave their apartment for good and could not return.
Incredible. So, and these levels are 24/7, or as long as they stay in the room, correct? So with a phone, yes, you can turn it off, but these levels are, they're blasting you as long as you're in your room. So that's
yes. I have to add that these levels is the maximum peak levels that we measured. We could not measure the real maximum because we reached the maximum level that the meter could measure. However, what is characteristic of 5G is that the radiation vary a lot. It's like it pulses, and it varies a lot also with the number of people who are using the base station, who are connected with their mobile phones to the base station. So if a lot of people are connected at that in a time we are measuring, we get very high readings. But however, if a few people are connected, the levels go down. And that was true also with the previous technology, the 3G, 4G. But I believe what we have seen so far, that the variation is much more larger with the 5G technology.
Can you specify which symptoms we're talking about that are related to this microwave syndrome for maybe people that are not familiar with that term?
Absolutely. The most common symptoms that we saw in our 5G case studies was difficulty sleeping. Without doubt, difficulty sleeping is is the most common effect of this kind of radiation. And that is also based on my previous experience from talking to people who have been affected from mobile phone masts and base stations. The second most common and severe symptom was abnormal fatigue. And then there were headaches, is very common as well, irritation, increased, stress, difficulty concentration, memory problems, and skin problems. Then it's very common also to have some effect on the heart. Many people get heart arrhythmia, and also tinnitus, nosebleeds, even nosebleeds are common, particularly it seems among the children.
I heard
who
about
seem to
that.
be more sensitive to develop nosebleeds.
Mm-hmm. And do you have specific case studies involving children? I know you mentioned before the interview there was one 4-year-old. So do you have examples of a family and how they were impacted by a 5G base station?
Absolutely. We have one of our case studies is about a family that rented a house and 125 meters from a 5G tower. And the family got immediately sick with typical microwave syndrome symptoms, sleeping difficulties, headache. The children got stomach problems. Even the children couldn't sleep. And most of them got headaches. This family rented this house only for a long weekend, 3 or 4 days. And during all the stay, they felt those symptoms. And the symptoms, what is important to note as well, is that when the exposure is terminated, the body recovers and the symptoms vanish. So that's a strong indication that it was particularly this exposure at this summer house, 125 meters from the 5G mast. That was the problem. We couldn't measure the level because they stayed at this house for such a short period. However, this year, at exactly the same period of time, I have to add, this was a summer camping area. So it was important for us to measure the radiation at the same time of the year when the camping area was full of people, like when they stayed there. And we measured over 700,000 microwatts this year at the same time that the family stayed there. So no doubt 700,000 microwatts is very high levels. I want to add that to compare this, what does this mean? 2 million or 700 microwatts. It can be compared to the recommendation from European scientists and medical doctors who in 2016 recommended maximum levels of between 1 and 100 microwatts per square meter, depending on frequency and the sensitivity of the person. So no doubt 700,000 and several million microwatts are extremely high levels. And I want also to add that the shocking truth is that we have no study whatsoever that shows that people can tolerate those levels. Our studies on 5G is the first studies ever conducted in the world on health effects from 5G. And now 5G has been rolled out for over 4 years without any study showing 5G is safe. And I think this is absolutely unacceptable. And it shows the influence that this industry has managed to get over the governmental agencies, the World Health Organization, and other organizations that are supposed to be protecting human health.
This is just incredible. This is ludicrous. And so you're telling me the levels that doctors were aware of what is good for our health tell us 0 to 100 is maybe tolerable. And even then, there are uncertainties. Some people are more sensitive. And you're telling me people are getting exposed at sometimes over 2.5 million units of radiation by base stations. And this is, so all these exposures are still within the legal limits in Sweden. Is this correct?
Yes, and the legal limits in USA and most countries in Europe. We have some countries in Europe, among them Switzerland, where astonishingly, curiously enough, the World Health Organization is based. They have 100 times lower limits than the most other countries in the world. Because they don't want to adopt those extremely high levels. In the USA, they are recommended by the FCC, and in Europe, for instance, they are recommended by the organization ECNIRP. And those limits are only based on short-term immediate effects that are so high that they cause immediate heating. So, and that's the only thing that they protect against. They only protect against immediate heating. So that means that we have no protection whatsoever against several days of exposure. And we have no protection whatsoever from the effects like those symptoms that are very commonly experienced from exposure to increased levels of this kind of radiation. For instance, sleeping problems, headaches, fatigue, dizziness, memory problems. We have no protection against a cancer risk, a risk for degenerative diseases, reproduction problems, harmful effects on behavior among children, which we fear this radiation can cause as well. We have a lot of studies showing that. So it's like we shouldn't have any, if we compare with radioactive radiation. Those limits we have for that kind of exposure are based on long-term effects. It's like we should say, well, if there was no problem immediately from your radiation exposure to radioactive exposure within an hour, there are no problems. And we know that is absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
You can compare also if we should have the same limits for various chemicals.
Imagine,
if you're not harmed within an hour, then there's no problem. So that's how absurd it is. I want to take those examples to show how completely absurd this is. And those limits are therefore criticized heavily by, I would claim, they are the majority of scientists in this field who want to have limits that protect human health better and taking into consideration the long-term effects and the lot of evidence we have on effects at levels well below those very high limits.
Yeah, this is crazy. And I know there's, for example, the EMF scientist appeal from 2015 that turned into now the ICBE group. I don't know if Professor Leonard Hardell is part of ICBE at this point.
Yes.
He is. So we also had Dr. Paul Heroux. We had Dr. Marta Herbert that is also part of ICBE as part of this 2025 summit. So all of these scientists are, I think they're among the best and really understand the biology. And what they say is simply these exposures are unsafe. And so we don't know what are the safe levels and why is ICNIRP, for example, at the international level, still refusing to look at the actual science, right? What is the situation here with regulatory agencies?
Well, I think we have to ask the journalistic question, who benefits?
Yeah.
And no doubt, ICNIRP, if we look at the ICNIRP limits, it's the telecommunications industry who benefits, who believes those limits are very important for them. I can give you an example that, for instance, the world leading 5G provider, infrastructure provider, Ericsson, in a presentation in 2018, concluded that the 5G rollout would be difficult or impossible if they were to have to adopt to limits that were 100 times lower than the ICNIRP limits. And we have seen lobbying activities and pressure on governments in Europe, for instance, Italy and Belgium, Brussels, a region of Brussels, to raise their levels, their limits, because they had 100 times lower limits and even more compared to ICNIRP limits. And they accepted. They raised their limits to pave the way for the 5G rollout. So that's one example. There is also the example, the aspect that an admittance that the ICNIRP limits have been too high, because is a risk to the telecommunications industry for being sued in courts regarding brain tumors caused by mobile phones, because the mobile phones are also adapted to this independent on those very high levels.
Right. Yeah.
So any admittance that the levels have been too high will have economic consequences for the industry.
Major. And I know that the reinsurance industry, Swiss Re and Lloyd's of London, I heard they don't insure the telecoms, and that's from several years ago at this point, over a decade, if I recall correctly, right? So the reinsurers say this is a big liability. We won't insure you when it comes to health impacts, because of course they don't believe that the science is definitive and that everything is very safe. They don't believe that a second. At least they see the risk that things will evolve in the future. So do you have insights? You've been doing this work for, over 2 decades at this point. Do you have insights about what is the right way to get involved or ask for safer limits? I know it's kind of I see ICNIRP as a friend group. They each tap each other on the back. Great job. Everyone is doing a good job. It's kind of a closed, impenetrable fortress at this point. How do you see this evolving? Are you hopeful that with the ICBE, for example, we could have an alternative regulatory agency that is proposed or that takes over the safety limits over the world? And how do you see this evolving, and how can we get involved as citizens?
That's a good question. My hope is that I think the media is very important. The media has a very big role in informing the public, and if the public is informed about the health risks and what the scientists' warnings and what the scientific studies really show, then there will be pressure on the decision makers and the politicians to take care of this issue and to improve the safety for the public. We have to recognize that the industry's influence on this issue, on the World Health Organization, on the European Commission, and I know in the USA, the FCC had, for instance, for some years, a director who was previously a lobbyist for the telecom industrial organization, which is completely unacceptable, of course. And the World Health Organization is also a captured agency by the industry. It was funded during 10 years by money from the telecommunications industry to handle this issue and to promote the ICNIRP limits. So what we need is to end this this capture by the industry over the regulatory agencies, the World Health Organization. We need independent media who informs the public, and then I think there will be, it will be go by itself. But as a citizen, as a concerned citizens, I encourage everybody to talk about this and to spread information about the health risks. We have a webpage called radiationprotection.se. There are many good other organizations working, for instance, in the US and Canada and other countries in Europe who inform the public about the health risks. And we have the ICBE EMF scientists who are doing an incredible job by informing the public and working for better protection.
I agree. This is, I think, the ICBE page, I don't know how many times I link to it to people who write to me, ask me what credible science is there that, for example, the safety limits are insufficient. This paper they published at the beginning of the formation of their group around 2022 is just stellar, talking about the safety limits, how they were created and why they're completely laughable on their face is completely ridiculous. And anyone in toxicology that looks at the actual work that was done or not done in the 80s to determine safety can clearly see through the joke that they are really. So no one is really protected at the moment, and I just hope that I can be part of this independent media, and you also are part. Are you still able to publish on this topic? Are there media what is the situation in Sweden? No one wants to receive the topic.
It's worse than ever. It's complete censorship or combined with spreading bad rumors about you. So smearing, it's absolutely. It's like a nightmare. It's like the former previous Soviet Union, the media in Sweden today. It's terrible. But I'm glad that on the international level, we have some very good independent media, and I hope those media can grow and can understand and publish articles about this very important issue to inform the public. Because now the public is forcefully exposed without their informed consent in their own homes, which I think is absolutely unacceptable, even criminal.
I agree 100%. I hope that with independent media, I see more podcasts around the world being more powerful than legacy media, Joe Rogan and alternative health media. I don't see them discussing human-made EMFs much. So I still think that unfortunately EMF is somehow attached with this idea that this is a fringe topic. Pesticides, yes, we talk about it. Microplastics, we talk about it. We talk against Monsanto. And then EMFs, not so much. There's a discomfort around the topic, but I think it will end eventually. And I do hope that with independent media, such as this summit is kind of part also of independent media. I can say what I want. It's my website, it's my summit, and we have around 40 to sometimes 60,000 people listening. It's a small corner of the internet, but I hope that through grassroots efforts, we can spread this information, talk about these dangers, and then make everyone involved from the industry to politicians aware that, look, we're demanding safer technologies. So I'm really, really grateful for your work, for the case studies that you published. I will link to all of them underneath this interview, of course, because people can review them. They can send them to school boards, regulators, politicians, and they're undeniable, right? And your work and your background, along with Professor Hardell, who has just a very prestigious scientific background, it's undeniable that this has been published And I haven't seen anyone say, these case studies are completely false or anything like that. So now it's there. It's there for everyone to see. And I think it will be massive. I'm so glad that you have published these and that you continue doing this work. And thanks for your courage and for your tenacity, even in the face of all this censorship that you're facing. So really props to you for doing this work, and you're a very inspiring figure for me, trying to do the same in a sense and follow in the footsteps of people that have been tackling this issue for decades. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I just want to finalize with the concern about the children growing up in this environment today, in this radiation soup from the 5G. The levels in towns and cities where there is a lot of 5G base stations are extremely high and dangerous. And children are particularly sensitive because their brain and nervous systems are continuously developing. So we need to do something, if not only to protect those small children who are completely dependent on the grown up, to protect them.
Thank you so much for these words. I agree 100%. And it goes through many, many things we shared during this online summit are about individual responsibility. So even there are cell phone towers, sure, and they are very concerning exposures. And in some situations, they need to be avoided. You literally need to move, but also individual responsibility of how you handle your devices. And if you don't decide to hand a tablet or a phone to the kid every day, all day, you're doing great, right? You're trying to restrict the amount of radiation. So that's also something that's going to be discussed throughout all the interviews. So thank you for these parting words. And thanks again for your work and for your presence.
Thank you.
I really hope that you liked this presentation. If you want to take action on what you just heard, you'll find links to everything that was mentioned by our guest speaker right underneath this interview. If you love this summit and want to own the recordings in audio, video, and written form for all of these 2025 interviews, make sure to click the buttons on this page to get the 2025 EMF Pack. This EMF Pack is heavily discounted during the summit launch and for a very limited time. Remember that every purchase supports my work as an independent citizen journalist, as well as the nonprofit partners that are associated with this summit. Thank you for your attention and support, and I'll see you in the next presentation.